Blaze politics reporter Rebeka Zeljko had the opportunity to speak with the head of the House Freedom Caucus fresh off yesterday's CR vote. Take a look.
Well, hey, everybody. We are joined today with House Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris. Thank you so much for, first of all, taking the time. I did want to ask you, most importantly, about yesterday evening's CR vote. Specifically, a lot of those meetings leading up to it that you were a part of. I think we reported a lot on the fact that White House officials like Russ Vought and even the president himself met with, members like yourself from the House Freedom Caucus, some of the more conservative members. And I was wondering if you had any insights about how those meetings went, if any concessions or commitments were made to sway those final holdouts. How did that go?
Well, the president made it pretty clear that we needed to keep the government open in order for Elon Musk and Doge to continue their function. And that's really important for the American people. Clearly, many members of the Freedom Caucus don't like voting for continuing resolutions, but this is a very different continuing resolution. This is, as I say, this is not your grandfather's continuing resolution. It's one that cuts spending and in a time of inflation, a actual nominal dollar cut in spending is a real cut to the size and scope of the federal government. So it also included monies for increased enlisted pay, Veterans Administration. And it eliminated all the earmarks. So those are big points, and those are what got the Freedom Caucus on board to support the president for this.
I did want to ask you because, as you mentioned, a lot of the House Freedom Caucus members, like yourself, have been spending skeptics in the past, I think is fair to say. So you mentioned all of those differences in this most recent CR that swayed you to vote for it. Now, of course, spending is going to have to be addressed 9 months down the road. Would you foresee endorsing another similar CR, or is this sort of a one-off vote? How are you going to approach spending now that we have a new administration and new leadership, things like that?
Sure. So Russ Vought is going to send a budget up, the president's budget. I believe the House will adhere to the budget limits that Russ Vought sends up to Capitol Hill, and then it goes over to the Senate. And look, it's up to the senators. If they don't agree to keep spending in line, I could foresee another circumstance where we may have to go to a continuing resolution again in order to stop an increase in spending over on the Senate side. But I hope that we can come to an agreement. I hope that the Democrats and members across the aisle realize that our debt and our deficit is a major problem and want to tackle it head on.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Democrats on the Senate side are definitely going to be in the hot seat these next few days as that deadline is approaching. Do you foresee them averting a government shutdown, or do you think that they're going to vote against what is essentially a Republican-led CR?
Well, look, the Democrats have railed against President Trump laying off thousands of federal workers, but are they willing to furlough 1 million? I mean, that's the decision they're going to have to make. I believe that the Senate will pass the continuing resolution. I don't think we're going to have a government shutdown, and then we're going to have to proceed pretty rapidly into the reconciliation discussion to deal longer term with both extending the Trump tax cuts as well as reining in deficit spending.
Yeah, so taking a step back, I mean, this most recent CR vote, a lot of people have described it as kind of a legislative miracle for Speaker Johnson, similar to the reconciliation vote we had a few weeks ago. Obviously, Republicans are presented with a historically narrow margin in the House, which doesn't give the Speaker a lot of wiggle room, and yet he managed to pass both of these resolutions among party lines, essentially. Do you foresee this continuing further down the road for other pieces of legislation, or do you imagine a circumstance where the Speaker will have to work with Democrats and make concessions like he might have in the previous Congress?
Well, as long as the president mainly agrees with the position of the House Freedom Caucus, that is that we need some fiscal responsibility. We need to change the way we do business in Washington, which I think he agrees with both of them. I think we'll be able to continue under this new way of doing business in Washington. But it remains to be seen. Pretty clearly, we pulled 2 rabbits out of a hat in the past 2 weeks, and I hope we continue to do it.
Last question here. So obviously we have a new administration, which has definitely changed the setting politically, not just in the White House, but on Capitol Hill. And we've also had some changes in staffing and leadership. Has that affected the legislative process at all? Have you seen a change or an improvement compared to the previous Congress since then?
Well, look, the Democrats appear to dig in. I'm not sure they're willing to work with us at this point on anything, but I think at some point they're going to agree to work with us. And Speaker Johnson, again, he listens to as he has to in a narrow majority, has to listen to everyone, and we have to come to a compromise consensus. And again, we've done it twice. I hope we can continue doing it.
It's all about finding that balancing point. Well, we appreciate your time, Chairman, and we look forward to speaking with you more in the future.
Okay.
Rebeka joins us now to discuss her chat with Representative Harris. So, Rebeka, thanks so much for doing that. And what stood out to you most with Representative Andy Harris?
Yeah, I think the moment that really stood out to me the most was just how positive his impression was of the CR in general. I mean, it was strange to hear not just a member of the House Freedom Caucus, but the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus to reflect on ACR in such a positive way. Now, of course, it's not because he all of a sudden changed his mind or his values rather on fiscal responsibility, but it's because the CR was different than other CRs. And the most meaningful difference is, as the chairman pointed out, the fact that there are actual spending cuts here. There's actually there's about $7 billion in spending less compared to fiscal year 2024. And that was ultimately one of the aspects that was able to persuade not just the chairman, but a lot of the members of the House Freedom Caucus that have historically voted against CRs or have had very negative opinions of CRs. And so I think just hearing such a positive impression of the CR coming from the member, or the chairman rather, of the House Freedom Caucus was really, it was a little bit disorienting, but I don't think it's unfounded.
Rebeka, so what can you tell us about, say more about the reasons people voted for it? I mean, because it is historic that you have so many very conservative members going for a CR. Everyone acknowledges that a continuing resolution is the enemy, and we don't want these anymore. We want Congress to actually pass a budget, God forbid. So say more about what you think the reasoning was.
Yeah, so there's a couple things at play here. One of them being the fact that Republicans have such a narrow majority in the House. And the Republicans right now, because of the vacancies that they're dealing with, can only afford one no vote on any piece of legislation, assuming that all Democrats vote against it. And I mean, this time around, actually, one Democrat, Jared Golden from Maine, he did vote in favor of the CR, but that wasn't the expectation. And so Johnson really went into this whole negotiation process only anticipating one no vote, which Thomas Massie always claims, and he did so again this time around. And so one of the reasons that the conference was able to stay unified, I think, is because nobody wants to be that deciding vote that sends the government into a shutdown. I mean, it's like an optic nightmare to be responsible for a government shutdown. Those things are not really received very well by your constituents. It's much easier to explain away continuing resolution than it is, why your constituents who work for the government are not getting their paychecks. And I think that's going to be part of the reason why Democrats, I'm assuming, will actually be able to work with Republicans to pass the CR in the Senate. Now, that's assuming that they pass it. But one of the main reasons why a lot of the fiscal conservatives were able to get on board was, again, because there were actual meaningful cuts in this CR compared to previous ones. I mentioned that overall it's about a $7 billion difference compared to the fiscal year of 2024. And one of those, so overall $13 billion were cut, but then $6 billion was added in defense spending. So overall, you're coming out with about $7 billion in savings there. And so not just that, though, there was also additional funding for ICE. And so that was able to get a lot of those conservatives on board, because ICE and border funding is actually really has been a priority, not just in the House, but nationally. It's been one of the leading issues going into the 2024 elections. And there was no earmarks. And so there was cuts to community projects. A lot of these smaller items that were attached to what was relatively a clean CR, I think really was what ended up persuading everybody to actually vote in lockstep and get the CR through the House.
Well, Speaker Mike Johnson, we heard from him on CNBC. Let's go ahead and listen to what he had to say.
But I'll tell you what we did, Joe, yesterday. We put on the floor a simple, clean bill to continue funding through September, the end of the fiscal year. And the Democrats, all but one, voted against that. They voted to shut the government down in the House. Thankfully, we got it through. We will send it over to the Senate now, and Chuck Schumer must decide. Senate Democrats have to decide. Are they going to cast a vote to keep the government open, or are they going to be responsible for shutting it down? We'll see what they do.
Yeah, to Speaker Johnson's point, what would be the Democrat logic for a shutdown? I thought that they were out there fear-mongering about the Republicans shutting it down during the Biden administration.
Yeah, Democrats, they're in the hot seat for once, as I mentioned in the interview. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this pans out over the next few days. Just a reminder to the audience, the deadline is actually on Friday. So we are 3 days out from the deadline. Senate Democrats, as the speaker mentioned, are forced to choose between passing a Republican-led, a Trump-endorsed CR, one that was overwhelmingly supported by conservatives in the House, or shutting down the government. I mean, I'm really not envious of their position, but as I mentioned earlier, earlier, I think it's a lot easier to explain away a continuing resolution as opposed to just shutting down the government altogether.
All right, so 60 seconds. We gotta wrap. But what's the future look like? I mean, this is going to go to the Senate. Is it gonna pass? This funds the government through September. What happens after that? What's the future look like?
I think it's very likely that this is going to pass. Again, nobody wants to deal with the government shutdown, but that means that we will have to address spending again in 9 months. And as Chairman Harris mentioned, it's very possible that we're going to be looking at another continuing resolution if Republicans on the House and the Senate are not able to come to some sort of agreement when it comes to getting this budget reconciliation through. That being said, the president will be meeting with Republicans in the following days to really start to advance these talks even further. And this is 9 months out. And so if negotiations continue at the pace that they have been over these last few months and the first few months of the Congress rather, and the pace that the administration has been going at, the pace the Senate has been going at, I mean, with the confirmations, I think that we will be able to see a successful agreement come to before September 30th.